Jerusalem. So the Lord surrounds his people. Surround us, Lord. Surround us, O Lord. We need to be in your presence. Surround us, Lord. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people. Surround us, Lord. Surround us, O Lord. We need to be in your presence. Surround us, Lord. Surround us, Lord. Surround us, O Lord. We need to be in your presence. Surround us, Lord. Surround us, Lord. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first believed. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior, has ransomed me. And like a flood, his mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we know less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior, has ransomed me. And like a flood, his mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior, has ransomed me. And like a flood, his mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace.
Good afternoon, everyone. Psalm 17. Hear the right, O Lord, attend unto my cry. Give ear unto my prayer that goeth not out of feigned lips. Let my sentence come forth from thy presence. Let thine eyes behold the things that are equal. Thou hast proved mine heart. Thou hast visited me in the night. Thou hast tried me, and shalt find nothing. I am purposed that my mouth shall not transgress. Concerning the works of men, by the word of thy lips, I have kept me from the paths of the destroyer. Hold up my goings in thy paths, that my footsteps slip not. I have called upon thee, for thou wilt hear me, O God. Incline thine ear unto me, and hear my speech. Show thy marvelous loving kindness, O thou that savest by thy right hand them which put their trust in thee from those that rise up against them. Keep me as the apple of the eye. Hide me under the shadow of thy wings. From the wicked that oppress me, from my deadly enemies who compass me about. They are enclosed in their own fat. With their mouth they speak proudly. They have compassed us in our steps. They have set their eyes bowing down to the earth, like as a lion that is greedy of his prey, as if it were a young lion lurking in secret places. Arise, O Lord, disappoint him, cast him down. Deliver my soul from the wicked, which is thy sword. For men which are thy hand, O Lord, for men of the world, which have their portion in this life, and whose belly thou fillest with thy hid treasure. They are full of children, and leave the rest of their substance to their babes. As for me, I will behold thy face in righteousness. I shall be satisfied when I awake with thy likeness. Okay, so as the superscript notes, if your particular version that you're reading from has it, this is a prayer of David. As we've talked about the superscripts a number of times before. Again, coming towards the beginning of the book, these tend to be psalms attributed to David. Certainly no reason I can think of to doubt that. And this psalm is rather typical of what we've seen from most of the others, and for more to come. A little bit lengthier than some that we've seen so far, not as long as some others that we're going to come to. But just kind of looking at it at a high level, the thing that kind of jumps out a little bit to me as I read through this one is it feels a little bit Job-ish in its thought. Looking at the outline that Brother Waycaster has here, verses 1 through 5, he notes the prayer of the righteous. Verses 6 through 9, the protection of the righteous. Verses 10 through 12, the persecution of the righteous, and then 13 through 15, the promise of the righteous. And as it's rather clear from the outline that he noted here, hopefully you kind of picked up on it a bit through the psalm as well. It's yet another one, and perhaps you grow weary of my pointing this out. Here you have a psalm expressed by someone who not only acknowledges that he's a righteous person. That is, again, not to say flawlessly perfect, but he's a righteous, a just man, one who does the right thing, who follows after God, who seeks after God. Not only is he willing to say such, he, kind of reminiscent of some of Paul's writings, he's calling upon God to acknowledge it, to having proven it, tested it. Just one more psalm that helps to reiterate the fact that in Psalm 14, which Paul alludes to in Romans 3, there's none righteous, no, not one. It is not a literal, absolute statement regarding the hereditary depravity of mankind. There is no such thing, at least not in the Bible. So, as we're kind of making our way through looking at some of the verses in particular, I'll remind you again, as I always do, I'm kind of following Brother Waycaster's comments for the most part. I mean, I've got some of my own mixed in as well amongst the notes, but where I do refer to his, oftentimes it's a bit different because he uses the ASV. I've read from the King James, so the wording is sometimes a bit different. So verses 1 through 5, the prayer of the righteous. Hear the right, O Lord. The basis upon which God hears prayer is and always has been righteousness, right? James tells us that the prayer of a righteous man availeth much. again, it is possible to be a righteous person. Righteous does not mean absolute perfection. It means doing the right thing. Unlike the Pharisees of Jesus' time, David shows us the example of one whose heart is submissive, his words earnest and sincere. Again, he's willing to acknowledge the fact that he's, generally speaking, a righteous person. He's someone who's seeking after God, who wants to do God's will, and because of that, he comes boldly before God's throne in prayer, making his petitions, his thoughts known. You can contrast it with the Pharisees, and you might say, well, they sound like they say the same thing, right? And here in Psalm 17, you have someone who starts off the prayer with, "Hear the right, O Lord." In other words, "Hear your righteous servant." That's what he means by it. Go to Luke and the Pharisee and the publican. Thank goodness, Lord, I'm not like this poor, wicked old publican over here. You may say, well, they sound the same. There's quite a difference in the demeanor, the attitude that you find here versus the blatant hypocrisy you find from the Pharisee there in Luke. But again, that doesn't mean that David here in Psalm 17 can't acknowledge the fact that, yes, he is out there trying to do the right thing, follow God's will, and as such, he's a servant of God and is willing to come boldly before the Lord as a right one. The repetition of identical desires is something that appears frequently throughout David's Psalms. All right, so as you're reading some of these Psalms, within a Psalm itself, or certainly across Psalms, you'll see the same thoughts repeated over and over and over. And it's worth noting that it isn't, you think, well, the Lord condemns repetitious prayer. No, he doesn't condemn repetitious prayer. He condemns vain repetitions, right? That is to say, it just becomes a rote habit. You stand up and say the exact same thing because you aren't necessarily thinking about what it is that you're saying. You'll find that David does tend to say the same things repeatedly in his prayers, oftentimes using the exact same verbiage. But again, that's not in and of itself problematic. If it isn't vain, if it isn't empty, if it isn't just a rote matter, of course, without anything behind it. Brother Lancaster has I'm not sure where this comes from, but it's a quote here. It says, "David's persistence is like the repeated blow of a hammer hitting the same nail on the head to fix it the more effectually, or the continued knocking of a beggar at the gate who cannot be denied an alms." So again, repetition not bad in and of itself. The situation, the disposition behind it matters a great deal. Just like we said regarding David's willing to acknowledge that he is a righteous man. Doesn't necessarily mean he's a vain hypocrite like the Pharisees. It depends. Verse 2, let my sentence, right? So sentence, you think about guilty or innocent, it's God's judgment upon the writer. So David feels that he's being wronged by his enemies, and he's appealing to God that God might interpose and exercise that which is right. So what, I'm being mistreated by the people around me. I haven't done anything wrong, but I'm being wronged. So God, you step in and judge. This is part of the reason I say it's somewhat reminiscent of Job. That sounds an awful lot like Job. Everyone around me, I'm suffering, everything's falling apart, everyone around me is doing just fine, and they're all telling me I must have done something wrong. But I look back at my life, I look at my conduct, I know I haven't, right? I'm not perfect, but I certainly am not such a wicked sinner I deserve all this that's being visited upon my head. So you get the sense that Job is, he comes very, very close to a fine line between coming boldly before God and stepping over the line and being outright disrespectful, talking out of line. He comes real close to it. I don't personally think he crosses that line, but you get the sense from Job of what my friends are saying isn't true. what his friends are saying about him isn't true. He knows it isn't true, and he's making a case to God. Judge me. I'm not the wicked sinner they're saying I am. Lord, you know this to be true, so you interpose your judgment. It's the same thing in Psalm 17 too. Let my sentence come forth from thy presence. Let thine eyes behold the things that are evil. God examine the situation at hand and act with equity towards this request, right, in a just manner. Verse 3. Okay, so the language here, thou hast proved mine heart, and incidentally, if you want to go to Jeremiah 17:9 and say, well, that's hereditary depravity, this is a tremendous problem, and David's saying it. The heart of man is only wicked continually, who can know it? Well, he says, thou hast proved mine heart, thou hast visited me in the night, thou hast tried me, and shalt find nothing. On purpose that my mouth shall not transgress. Again, Jeremiah 17, as I always say, the context matters tremendously. If you've ever heard that particular verse used in that context, I would challenge you to read the rest of it, the rest of the chapter. It's kind of like Psalm 14. He's dealing with a people in a particularly desperate, wicked situation. But anyway, the language here suggests that the psalmist is requesting a thorough investigation on God's part into his life. The result, David knows he's proven himself to be righteous and trustworthy. He's not deserving of the treatment he's receiving from the hand of his enemy. Again, a very, very Jobish kind of thought. You have similar things said by Paul on occasion. Calling God, calling heaven as a witness to the things that he says. And David here, like, you proved my heart, you visited me in the night, you know what kind of a person I am, you know what kind of a life I lead. You try me, there's nothing to be found there, right? No charge to be laid. Verse 4, concerning the works of men, by the word of thy lips, I've kept me from the pounce of the destroyer. Seems to mean that with regard to the conduct of men, the wicked course that they tend to pursue, the psalmist is declaring that he's guarded his conduct. He hasn't fallen into the same kind of sins that those around him participate in. Right? So he's been, and it kind of ties to how he finishes verse 3, on purpose my mouth shall not transgress. Right? He's gone to great lengths to ensure that his conduct, his behavior, is not like the wicked people around him. Verse 5, he continues his declaration of innocence. Hold up my goings in thy paths, that my footsteps slip not. He's been on the right path. He's been on the right track. He's done the right thing. He calls for God's investigation and judgment, because he knows if God investigates his life, what's going to be found. And here in verse 5, hold up my goings in thy paths, my footsteps slip not. Lord, help me to keep going the way that I've been going. And it's worth noting that the true test of one's character comes during the trials of life. Certainly David seems to understand this. He's clearly in a difficult situation at the time he's writing this. And as part of this prayer in the beginning of the psalm, he calls upon God to continue to give him the kind of strength and guidance that he's received up to that point. Okay, so verses 6 through 9, he continues, as Brother Waycaster notes, the protection of the righteous. Verse 6, I've called upon thee, for thou wilt hear me, O God. Incline thine ear unto me, and hear my speech. Okay, so as at other times, David is simply beseeching an answer to his prayer. Right, the request to incline thine ear unto me is emphatic. Sometimes when we're tempted to seek revenge, that's the time to pray that God will keep us strong. And sometimes all the time, the key to overcoming sin is to keep that channel of communication with God, this avenue of prayer open, not to give up on it. And it's evident that this is David's way of operating. Show thy marvelous loving kindness, O thou that savest by thy right hand them that put their trust in thee from those that rise up against them. Okay, so he's calling upon God to separate his mercies on this occasion from the, I guess you might say, the ordinary providence or mercy that he tends to show. The psalmist has already spoken here and in other psalms we've read and others to come, the fact that God provides and sustains and shows kindness and love and mercy just in practically every human endeavor that we as his people undertake. But the sense here is that he's looking for a particular sense of mercy or favor to be shown to him. He's in a particularly challenging situation. That makes me think sometimes, we often pray, and rightly so, for things in a general sense. Oftentimes if I'm leading a prayer in a service, you may pray for members in our congregation or family members, friends that we have in the world. If they're sick, that they might be made well. You pray for those who care for them and so forth in a general sense. Oftentimes it's a good thing to zero in and to pray more specifically, for more specifics. Not to say that there's nothing wrong with praying for things in a more general sense. We can and should and do that. But I think here the psalmist is zoning in upon the particular occasion. It says, keep me as the apple of the eye, hide me under the shadow of thy wings. The eye is one of the most precious members of the body, and so I think the psalmist is kind of using this again to highlight the particular circumstance at hand. Give special attention to him in this particular moment, the same way that one might take special measures to protect one's eyes or one's eyesight. It's not to say that you don't protect yourself in a general sense, right? If you're, something comes flying at you, you reflexively move to protect yourself. But when it comes to protecting something as precious and as fragile as your eye, especially if there's a particular threat out there for it, you go to greater lengths to make sure that's protected because it's so valuable, because it's so fragile. He says, keep me as the apple of the eye, right? Again, keep him, protect him, look out for him, show him loving kindness, show him mercy, but in the situation at hand to an even greater degree, right? The same way that one would protect the eye. Hide me under the shadow of thy wings, right? A place of protection from. So why is this? Why is he imploring God for this particular degree of protection? Verse 9, from the wicked that oppress me, from my deadly enemies who compass me about. You get a sense for the magnitude of the danger to the psalmist. Evidently, this is some point in David's life where there's real intent upon an enemy to do him physical harm, to endanger his life. What's the occasion? Pick one. There are a number of them from David's life. Typically, with the Psalms, people tend to think of when he's on the run from Saul, which could certainly be. There's also the occasion with Absalom's rebellion. Whatever it is, because he doesn't say, and there's really nothing that I can see. The commentators don't tend to see anything here either that really suggests the issue at hand. But he's in mortal danger, and that's the occasion for the specific things that he's saying. Verse 10, they are enclosed in their own fat, with their mouth they speak proudly. Clearly, whoever these enemies are, they're doing just fine. They're prosperous, and consequently they tend to be haughty and arrogant and quite full of themselves. Again, one more reason, like I said at the outset, this psalm just kind of at a high level to me feels a lot like Job and his situation. You get a similar impression there. You have Job sitting there covered in sores from head to toe, sitting in the ash heap. Then you've got his horrible friends round about. They're all doing just fine. They're all well and good, telling him how absolutely terrible he is and how he must have done something to deserve his horrendous situation. David, at this point in time, whatever that point is in a similar situation. The wicked people who were set upon doing him harm, they're well and good. They're prospering. They have now compassed us in our steps. They have set their eyes bowing down to the earth. Brother Waycaster has noted here that Barnes suggests the fact that the second person suggests that the psalmist is not alone. They have compassed us in our steps. It would seem, and if that's the case, that would tend to make me think more in David's life of the Absalom situation, in which he has people on the run with him from those who would seek to do them harm. But again, it doesn't necessarily give us any clues to what specific situation it is. But he does use a plural word here, plural pronoun. And it's noted here in the commentary, and this is a good point. He says, for one thing, it could also be rendered the same way in the singular rather than the plural. But also, the battle that Satan wages is not against an individual, but the whole of God's people. And his specific example here, the refusal of Mordecai in the book of Esther to bow before Haman turned that wicked man's anger upon all the Jews. Right? So it started out as an individual matter with Mordecai, but it ended up affecting many others. So that's something to note here as well. Again, trying not to read too much into it. Verse 12. Like a lion that is greedy of his prey, as it were a young lion lurking in secret places. There's a visual for you, a good metaphor of what this enemy is like a lion that's just waiting. He's there, he's patient. He's willing to wait for the prey, but he's also ready to pounce the instant the opportunity presents itself. Again, highlighting the gravity of the situation in which David finds himself. Verses 13 through 15, the rest of the psalm, promise of the righteous. Arise, O Lord, disappoint him being the enemy. Disappoint him, cast him down, deliver my soul from the wicked, which is thy sword. Okay, so the ASV, and again, as I mentioned, Brother Waycaster uses the ASV, so his commentary sometimes reads a bit differently, and this is one case where I think the ASV makes a little more sense. If you're reading that in the King James Version, especially that last phrase, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The ASV, rather than disappoint him, says confront him. So the prayer, the thought here being what the psalmist is asking about is that God would come before his enemy, God would interpose himself between the psalmist and the enemies, put himself in the midst, right into the battle between the psalmist and those who threaten him so that they can't reach him, right? Arise, O Lord, confront him, cast him down, right? Step into the battle on my side, get between us and deal with this threat is the idea. But the latter part in particular, in the King James it reads, deliver my soul from the wicked, which is thy sword. The ASV has, deliver my soul from the wicked by thy sword, which makes a whole lot more sense. And I don't know, he doesn't explain it here why the King James translates it that way. Perhaps it was a mistake, because it really makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. But that makes a lot more sense. Deliver my soul by thy sword. And that's important because David, the psalmist understands it's God's sword upon which David is depending for the destruction of the enemy. And you might think, in fact, you might even jot a little note to the side referring back to the account of David and Goliath. same guy, right, to whom the psalm is attributed as a young man, fighting against the Philistine champion, putting his faith in God to strike Goliath down rather than his own ability. For men which are thy hand, O Lord, for men of the world, which have their portion in this life, and whose belly thou fillest with thy hid treasure, they are full of children and leave the rest of their substance to their babes. One of the age-old questions is, why does God allow the wicked to prosper as they do? Especially when good people suffer. Now, why is it that righteous people suffer in this world, the wicked seem to prosper? And the psalmist David doesn't really take up the question. At least not here he doesn't. In other psalms we find it. But here he provides a contrast between himself and between those who place their trust and confidence in material things. Right? He makes the observation. He draws the contrast. Even as he is on the defense, imploring God for protection from these enemies who were surrounding him, seeking to do him harm. Simply noting the fact that those who were against him are prosperous. He already noted it. Goes back to verse 10, right? They're enclosed in their own fat, with their mouth they speak proudly. That's simply the reality of his situation. But note verse 15. Here's the contrast, especially the very beginning of the verse. As for me, right? So forget them. Forget those people. Forget those people who have it all, who are prospering. He says, as for me, I will behold thy face in righteousness. I shall be satisfied when I awake with thy likeness. It's not to say there aren't plenty of times in David's own life when he prospers. I was going to say those who may be giving him trouble at the time, and others around about him who put more concern in things of this world and in this short physical life than they do spiritual matters, that they don't often suffer as well. And perhaps there's a bit of an Ecclesiastes lesson in the mix of all of this too. You have these cycles of life, you have things that happen in this material world, and that's simply how it is. Sometimes good people prosper, sometimes they suffer. Sometimes wicked people prosper, sometimes they suffer. And that's just part of the physical reality in which we all live. David, again here, not disputing it, but he does draw the contrast. No matter what happens, he will behold God's face in righteousness. He'll be satisfied when he awakes with God's likeness. As for me, you might note alongside that one, if you happen to take notes in your margins, Joshua 24:15, right? As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Pointing out yet again, there's a choice to be made. And David is certainly making the right one. So in closing, a couple of lessons to note. This psalm is a prayer, and certainly this psalm shows us that as God's people, we can confidently and boldly bring our petitions before God. Pray confidently, nothing doubting. That's one lesson. It's one example this psalm gives us regarding prayer. Secondly, righteousness of life gives confidence in prayer. If you think of the lives of men like David and Job, they can go before God and say the kind of things that he did. Going back to verses 2 and 3, let my sentence come forth from thy presence. Verse 3, thou hast proved mine heart, visited me in the night. Thou hast tried me and shalt find nothing. Right? He knows what kind of a life he's been living. He knows what kind of a life he's been living behind closed doors when no one else knows. And because he knows the kind of life he's been living, he knows he's been walking in righteousness. He can confidently go before God in prayer. He has nothing to hide, nothing to be ashamed of in doing so. Third, only God can provide true justice. equitable justice, right? That which is 100% correct and fitting in every circumstance. Fourth, the words of God are the only safe and reliable guide for our lives, right? The way to walk through this life, the way to conduct oneself, you can count upon God to show it exclusively. Fifth, verse 10. Out of the heart, the abundance of the mouth speaks. Right? Now it's a bad example in verse 10. They're enclosed in their own fat, with their mouth they speak proudly. But the point is, the lesson is, what's in the heart is what's ultimately going to come out of the mouth. These enemies that are troubling David, right? Their speech, the words that they use betray what's in their hearts. Pride, arrogance, wickedness. They're certainly one of many examples in Scripture that you find of it. And then finally, something David clearly seems to understand, and we need to take to heart as well. Vengeance belongs to God. God will recompense. Yes, there are those who trouble us. There are wicked people everywhere who sometimes plague us personally, and we may want that revenge. We may want God to, as David prays here, to step in and confront them on our behalf. But we have to rest assured that whatever judgment there is to be meted out, whatever price there is to be paid on the wicked's part, God will be the one to make that judgment and to render the verdict in due time. And until then, no matter what's going on in the world around us, no matter how well things may seem to be going for the wicked, for those who trouble us, for those who might be described as the psalmist describes these in verse 14, right? Everything's going just fine for them. They're living it up and seemingly having a good life. And despite that, we need to have the same attitude as David at the close of the psalm. As for me, in other words, no matter what else is going on in the world around me, I will behold thy face in righteousness. I shall be satisfied when I awake with thy likeness. So that is Psalm 17. Lord willing, we will continue on next time with Psalm 18, the lengthiest one we've come to yet. So we'll be looking forward to that. Thank you.
Over all the earth you reign on high, every mountain stream, every sunset sky. But my one request, Lord, my only aim, is that you'd reign in me again. Lord, reign in me, reign in your power, over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? Over every thought, over every word, may my life reflect the beauty of my Lord. 'Cause you mean more to me than any earthly thing. So won't you reign in me again? Lord, reign in me, reign in your power, over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? Lord, reign in me, reign in your power, over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? You are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again?